Passover is one of the most important and celebrated holidays in Judaism, and it tells a remarkable story of freedom and faith. The Jewish people listened to this story as to not forget the events that transpired. Long ago, the Jewish people were living in Egypt, but they were not free. They were slaves under the rule of a powerful Pharaoh. The Pharaoh made their lives very hard and forced them to work long hours building cities and monuments. One day, a baby boy named Moses was born. To protect him from the Pharaoh's order to kill all Hebrew baby boys, his mother placed him in a basket and hid it in the river. Pharaoh's daughter found the basket and decided to raise Moses as her own in the palace. Moses grew up knowing he was Hebrew, and he felt sad for his people's suffering. As Moses grew older, he saw the harsh treatment of the Hebrew slaves, and one day, he couldn't take it anymore. He defended a Hebrew slave being beaten by an Egyptian and ended up killing the Egyptian. Afraid for his life, Moses fled Egypt and lived in the desert for many years. During this time, he became a shepherd and started a family. One day, while tending to his flock, Moses saw a bush that was on fire, but was not burning up. He approached it, and God spoke to him from the burning bush. God told Moses that he was chosen to lead the Hebrew people out of slavery in Egypt and into freedom. At first, Moses was scared and unsure, but with God's reassurance, he agreed to return to Egypt. Moses and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh and asked him to let the Hebrew people go free. But Pharaoh refused. Because of Pharaoh's stubbornness, God sent 10 terrible plagues to Egypt. Each plague was a sign of God's power and a punishment for the Egyptians' cruelty. The plagues included turning the Nile River into blood, sending swarms of frogs, lice, and flies, causing livestock to die, and covering people in painful boils. Then came hail, locusts, darkness, and finally the most dreadful plague of all, the death of the firstborn sons in Egypt. To protect the Hebrew families from this last plague, God gave Moses specific instructions. Each family was to sacrifice a lamb and put its blood on the doorposts of their homes. This sign would tell the angel of death to pass over their houses, sparing their firstborn children. That night, every Egyptian firstborn son died. The Hebrews were spared because they followed God's command. Pharaoh was devastated and finally agreed to let the Hebrews go. The people gathered their things and left Egypt quickly, not even having time to let their bread rise. This is why, during Passover, Jewish people eat matzah, a type of flatbread, to remember their ancestors' hasty departure from Egypt. God led the Hebrews through the desert with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. When they reached the Red Sea, Pharaoh changed his mind and sent his army after them. Moses parted the Red Sea, allowing the Hebrews to walk through on dry land. When Pharaoh's army tried to follow, the sea closed over them, and they were swept away. The Hebrews were finally free. They sang songs of joy and praise to God for their deliverance. The Jews did not go directly to the Promised Land. They wandered the desert for 40 years whilst God kept them alive. God guided them to Mount Sinai, where after 40 days and 40 nights, he gave Moses the 10 Commandments and the laws that would shape their new, free society. Every year during Passover, Jewish families come together to retell this story. They hold a special meal called a Seder, where they eat symbolic foods and remember the hardships and miracles of their ancestors. Passover is not just about remembering the past. It's about celebrating freedom and the enduring spirit of the Jewish people. And that's the story of Passover, a story of faith, courage, and the triumph of freedom over oppression.